Welcome to the Worldview Network. Everyone is talking about how the Iran war is destroying the U.S. economy, but almost no one is asking a different question. What would have happened without it? Gas prices are rising. Oil has surged past $90 a barrel. Military spending is climbing by the billions. But according to some economists, the real shock isn't the war itself. It's the possibility that the U.S. economy was already heading toward a crisis, and this conflict may be accelerating a reset that was coming anyway. Long before the first strike hit Kharg Island, warning signs were already appearing across the American economy. Job growth had started slowing, economic expansion was cooling, and global markets were already nervous after years of tariff tensions and supply chain disruptions. Economists were beginning to warn that inflation pressures were not going away anytime soon. One prominent forecast from Diane Swank, chief economist at KPMG, predicted inflation could still reach 3.3% by late 2026, even without a major geopolitical shock. In other words, the United States was already drifting toward a potential slowdown, possibly even a recession. And then the war began. But here's where the story gets complicated. Because wars don't just destroy economies. Throughout history, they've also rebuilt them. And some analysts believe this conflict could trigger the same kind of economic shift. How war can stimulate the economy. Let's break down the argument step by step. Layer 1. The defense spending boom. When wars begin, military spending surges. Defense contractors ramp up production, from missiles and aircraft to logistics systems and surveillance technology. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, and Boeing receive massive contracts to replenish equipment and expand production. But the impact goes far beyond those companies. Every missile system requires metals, electronics, software, transportation, and thousands of skilled workers across the supply chain. Historically, military spending has sometimes acted as a short-term economic stimulus. After the attacks of September 11 attacks, for example, defense spending surged and helped support economic recovery following the 2001 recession. Layer 2. Energy independence accelerates. The second factor is energy. Iran has threatened shipping routes through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical oil corridors in the world. Roughly 20% of global oil supply flows through that narrow channel. Any disruption sends shockwaves through global energy markets. But the United States is now the world's largest oil producer. Higher global oil prices can suddenly make domestic drilling, shale extraction, and LNG exports far more profitable. That means increased investment in American energy infrastructure, pipelines, refineries, export terminals, and drilling operations. In other words, a global energy shock could accelerate the push toward U.S. energy dominance. Layer 3. The dollar gets stronger. The third factor involves the global financial system. During times of geopolitical instability, investors tend to move their money into safer assets. And historically, the U.S. dollar has been the world's preferred safe haven. Oil is largely traded in dollars, global debt markets rely on dollars, and central banks hold dollar reserves to stabilize their economies. So, when global uncertainty rises, demand for U.S. dollars often rises with it. That reinforces the United States' position at a time when emerging economic blocs have been exploring alternatives to dollar dominance. Now, before you say this sounds completely insane, let's talk about what this war is actually doing to everyday Americans right now. The real cost, because the costs are real, and they are rising fast. Gas prices have climbed from $2.98 to $3.58 per gallon, a jump of roughly 20%. Diesel prices are up even more, nearly 24%. Global oil prices have surged from about $65 per barrel to over $90. And the cost of the conflict itself is staggering. Military operations are estimated to be costing the United States around $1 billion per day. At the same time, economists and policy analysts are raising alarms about the broader economic risks. Publications like Chatham House, CNN, and The Economist have warned that a prolonged conflict could trigger a new wave of global inflation and recession risks. For households already struggling with rising costs, the pressure is immediate. Higher fuel prices mean more expensive transportation. More expensive transportation means higher food prices. And higher food prices mean tighter household budgets. So the question becomes unavoidable: is the war stabilizing the economy, or pushing it closer to the edge? The answer depends on one critical variable: how long the war lasts. If the conflict ends quickly, within weeks, the economic effects could resemble a short-term stimulus. Defense spending surges. Energy investment accelerates. Markets recover once uncertainty fades. This pattern was seen after the early stages of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, when markets rebounded after initial volatility. But if the war drags on for months, or even years, the picture changes dramatically. Sustained oil shocks could drive inflation higher, consumers could cut spending, government debt could spiral even faster as military costs mount. Analysts at Chatham House have warned that a prolonged regional conflict could inflict a deep economic wound on the global economy, and recent events suggest the situation could escalate. Further, strikes on key infrastructure, missile launches, and threats to major shipping lanes are raising fears that the conflict could spread across the region. History shows that every war has a tipping point, a moment when the economic stimulus effect ends and the destructive impact begins. The question now is simple. Has the United States already crossed that line? Right now, the US-Iran war is not saving the economy, but it has created a situation where if the conflict ends quickly, the economic reset could resemble something very different: a surge in defense manufacturing, a renewed push for energy independence, a stronger global demand for the US dollar. Those forces are real, but so are $90 oil prices and $1 billion a day in military spending. The clock is ticking. What happens next may determine whether this war becomes an economic lifeline or an economic disaster. So what do you think? Is this conflict stabilizing the economy or pushing it to war crisis? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep analysis like this, subscribe to Worldview Network.